Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our second stage event, Looking East, Understanding the Japanese Community, hosted by Iluna Minori, who you might recognize as one of the translators who hosts our live letter translations occasionally, as well as a subreddit moderator for the Final Fantasy XIV subreddit. This event is free, obviously, but we are doing it also to raise awareness for donations to the Trevor Project as part of our Pride Month donation drive. You can find the link to this in the main stage discussion channel pinned under the event description. Before we begin, I need to read a legal disclaimer. This event is a public stage channel and is being recorded. By attending this event, by participating in any Q&A, or by speaking or performing during this event, you are consenting to audio recordings of your voice and or performances, as well as video recordings of your username and profile, even if you do not speak and or perform during the event. You also consent to the copying, creation of derivative works, use, distribution, and publication of the recordings and any postings on social media, public announcements, publications, websites, applications, and other commercial, marketing, or promotional materials produced by or for Discord Inc. without your review or approval worldwide and in perpetuity. Please refrain from the use of profanity or any obscene language or remarks during this event. As a reminder, Discord's community guidelines apply, in addition to our server-specific rules. In violation of these guidelines, including any form of hate speech, bullying is prohibited and may result in the removal from the event, the server, or Discord as a whole. With that out of the way, Luna Minori can take off with the event.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Can anyone hear me? Is it all right? Is the
You're
volume
perfect.
okay?
Yep.
Okay, right. Okay. Let's begin. Okay, hello. Hello everyone here, and welcome to the stage event titled Looking East, Understanding the Japanese Community. I'm your speaker of this event today. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you here who participate in this event. And I would also like to take the chance to thank Inai for giving me the chance to speak up and share with you on how is it like to play on a Japanese server as a foreigner myself. Okay, along with sharing insights on how the community is like. So hopefully with this stage event, you will get to learn a little or two about how the community and its culture work, especially with the upcoming data center travel feature, which is scheduled to be implemented in near future, which allows all players to be able to travel across different data centers. After this talk, there will be a Q&A session available for most of you so that you can ask questions, and I'll be able to, I will try to answer your question as much as I'm able to. Okay, okay, to begin on the next session, let's begin by giving myself a little bit of a self-introduction to all of you here. Okay, my name is Iluna Minori. Okay, I'm a freelance translator as well as an illustrator who main summoner in Final Fantasy XIV with the name Saya Amemiya. I'm from Chocobo server, which is situated in the Mana data center. I joined this game from the Heaven Sword era. At the time when E3, during the E3 2015, around there. So I actually joined the game after watching the trailer. Final Fantasy VII Remake, it was first announced on that time. So after the announcement, I was thinking, perhaps because I haven't been playing a Final Fantasy title for a very long time, so I was looking around for a title that, for a Final Fantasy title that allows me to, get into the series again, considering I'm the longtime fan of the particular franchise. And I joined this game from the Heaven Sword era, and if my memory doesn't fail me, I believe it was a week after the release of the 3.0 launch trailer. Yeah, I was actually quite impressed by the launch trailer and its excellent presentation, which is why I joined the game. I first created my character as an Arcanist on Tiamat server. So Tiamat server is actually located on Gaia data center, which after that I moved to Tomberry, which is situated in the Elemental data center around patch 2.1 to join my real life friends. Also, I had another purpose of actually moving to Tomberry, which is to actually clear the Binding Core of Bahamut, which at the time is already very old content. And apparently public parking doesn't really work. So the queue times was terrible. So I had to actually join my friends in Thornbury in order to clear the rate here. Needless to say, I was a little bit disappointed because the mode I got from the game wasn't really that engaging as already presented from the the launch trailer. So yeah, but that's not really relevant to the subject we're discussing today. So around 3.4, patch 3.4, yeah, due to personal issues and the difficulty of actually bugging rates at the time, Midas, if I'm not mistaken, I moved to Chocobo server in hopes that I can actually do bugging as well as getting away from all these real life personal dramas and all that. So it was a period where crossword party finder feature did not exist, and I was quite frustrated over being unable to clear the Midas tier, which at that point I only managed to prop up to the second phase of Alexander Midas fourth floor, so known as AS at the time. So at the time I sought to make clearing created at least my goal, and I managed to actually achieve this in the span of 3 weeks after bugging through it in Mena data center in Chocobo server. So if you're wondering why I'm sharing this, is because at the time, bugging a raid tier was widely considered by many non-Japanese players to be an extremely difficult feat, and some even say it was impossible. This is obviously untrue, but when it comes to bugging on Japanese servers, and there are factors to why this was possible. But you will get to learn more as I go through with the staging. Oh, before I forgot, I also authored the Final Fantasy XIV Japanese to English Dictionary Guide, which I believe you can easily find it on the Art Morning website. Or if you're using CooperWatt, you may access the guide through the command of FAQ space JP guide without the spaces. The guide is made specifically for the purpose to players who want to play on the Japanese servers, and for whatever reason, you may want to actually play on the Japanese server, but you're not too Japanese savvy. Yeah. So before I go through most of the details, I would like to issue a disclaimer on my part. So just to let you all know, the main objective of this event today is to provide an insight as well as to share my personal experiences playing in the community, in the Japanese community, as well as to show how it functions within the game. But just to let you all know that ultimately I'm not a know-it-all when it comes to this topic, and I'm aware that different players will have different experiences and biases that make up their experiences over there. So what I experienced doesn't necessarily mean it's the same for the others as well. So obvious, considering I only play on Japanese servers, I also do not speak the same, as in I do not speak comparisons, and will try to avoid them as much as possible. It will be unfair to the NA community, the North American community, and the Europe community as well. Because I don't go there, I definitely do not know much about the culture over there as well. So comparisons wise, I try not to speak it up as much as possible. Most of the knowledge I have about the community is mainly based on my personal experiences and reading lots and lots and lots of Japanese summary sites, which I will explain what this means later on without directly participating in them. So whatever I've said here today, if you are listening up to now, please take whatever you have listened to today as a point of reference instead of a Bible. Yep. Another point I would like to make clear before I begin is that all listeners here who are listening to this stage event will be given the assumption that you all know the Japanese language. This is done because obviously when you know Japanese and you're playing on the Japanese community, the only thing that you want to know is how they will behave and how they will act. So this is done with the assumption that everyone here knows the language beforehand. Yeah. So I also know that most of you listeners here don't actually know the language, but let's just pretend for the duration of these events. So yeah, for simplicity's sake. So as long as you're coaching this, let's begin. Okay. Now on to the main event of this main meat of this event. Let's begin by greetings. Okay. Greetings. I'm not really clear on whether greetings are considered to be important in the Western sphere, but in Japan, when you're playing on the Japanese server, greetings are important because it sets up the most basic impression, manners, coming from you. So, however, Japanese players aren't actually openly approachable, and you have to assume that they are not approachable by default. You can't just barge into the server and say, "Hello, everyone. My name is X, and I just came from this particular region or country or anything. Nice to meet you." Blah 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 blah. You do not have to shout. You don't have to type any shouts about greetings or anything in a public space like Limsa Lomingsa or Gridania, Udaha. You don't have to do that because they are naturally not approachable by default. So in cities and open fields, shouts are generally not used unless if you are actually establishing a new FC and you want to recruit someone else, then yes, shouts are used that way. So of course you're not going to just approach any random Japanese and emote them to talk to them. 99% of the time they will ignore you. Or if worse enough, you will actually get reported because of harassment. So when should you actually greet them? Or rather, in what cases do you actually have to greet them? Citing one of the most prominent example here will be dungeons. Of course, there are other cases where, other cases outside from dungeons where you greet them as well, like when you're added into link shells or joining FC or communities, where you have, but for over there, you're going to usually do a self-introduction and a greeting. So you can't really run away from it. But this topic isn't meant to complicate things further. So let's just focus only on the dungeons for now. Pretty sure everyone know here that when you reach level 16, you unlock your first dungeon, which is Stasha, and you're going to pit against 3 other players when you enter the dungeon. So the very first thing you should do is to type Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Because the reason why you're doing so is because you're creating an impression and as well as fulfilling the basic Japanese manners to them, which is to greet them before you start the dungeon. Depending on the data center you play on, the players will react. You will usually have a little bit of different reaction depending on how you write them. If you write without using the auto translate feature, they will definitely not rouse any suspicion on you because they will assume that when you type Yoroshiku onegaishimasu in Japanese language, as in hiragana, they will not suspect any further. Then they will actually assume that you know the language, unless you purposely screw up a lot of times and you're behaving very weirdly. That will actually arouse the people to actually question you that, okay, are you actually doing what you are supposed to do? Okay, are you actually all right or something like that? If you are not answering, then you immediately will expose yourself to them that you do not know Japanese at all. So assuming that if you know the language, whenever they ask you the question, you need to react immediately. Yeah. So again, that's dungeons. So I don't really think that it's really hard for the players to screw up. So I certainly hope that you guys know your deal. Okay. Anyway, a simple Yoroshiku onegaishimasu is enough to actually get the ball rolling, as long as you do your dungeons without being a nuisance to others. When you finish the dungeon, okay, once you finish the last boss and you're about to leave the dungeon and all that, people will usually type Otsukare-sama deshita, means thank you for the run, and thank you. This is a very simple thank you actually. Those 2 greetings are the only greetings that you need to remember whenever you run dungeons with the Japanese, because throughout the runs, very rarely there will be conversations, and almost 99% of the time there will be no further conversation needed at all. And even if they do, you are free to not participate. So at first, those 2 greetings might be very hard to understand, assuming if you don't know Japanese yet. But eventually, once you are doing it many, many times now, doing dungeon runs, this will become a routine. So you don't have to worry about it. Okay, giving you the context of how these 2 words mean, Yoroshiku onegaishimasu is a polite default form of saying best regards in Japanese, or hello. Yeah, that works too. And Otsukare-sama deshita means thank you for your hard work, to put it very literally. But in the FF14 context, it means thank you for your hard work. And very put it literally, it also means thank you. So hello and thank you, pretty much similar to the Western sphere as well. So if you want the most accurate and interpretation of both words, it's basically hello for Yoroshiku onegaishimasu and thank you for Otsukare-sama deshita. Just to repeat that. So with that, it pretty much covers everything you need to know about dungeons. There's definitely no conversation required because most of the time you just want to progress and clear the dungeon as smoothly as possible. Just agree, just say goodbye. So this works especially well on expert dungeons. While this sounds very simple and may not worth a topic on its own, it's actually worth knowing that Japanese take greetings very seriously, especially when group up. Part of the complaints I've read about Japanese when paired with non-Japanese players is that they don't greet at all, which exposes yourself easily that you're not a Japanese speaker. And in raids, this will cause a very huge problem because communication in Final Fantasy XIV to the Japanese is utmostly important, the most important part of the game. I've also read a lot of Japanese discussion that some players, be it Japanese or non-Japanese, have the tendency to not greet during dungeon runs, and it actually sparked a debate about it. Yeah, so it's actually quite a big deal. So if you want to run dungeons with them, greetings are especially important. I've also seen cases where people will usually write hello in English or thank you for the runs as well. When I was still in Thornberry, I think I tend to encounter a lot of players just write their greetings in English. But usually to the Japanese, they don't mind because they know that Elemental Data Center do have quite a lot of foreigners playing in the server. So as long as you do your basic greeting, they usually don't care. But maybe I was just lucky. I don't really see people bitching about foreign players using English to greet with them. So maybe because I'm just lucky. Yeah. So this concludes about the segment about this greeting part, and I really couldn't emphasize enough that how important this may sound. Assuming we drop the pretense about knowing Japanese and all, as long as in dungeons, even auto-translate greetings will be fine. To them, this means that you at least took a minimum amount of effort to greet the party. It may not be the best idea here, but it still works nonetheless. You're also not required to be actually the conversation maker if you're not the social type. Still, greetings are actually important. So remember that greetings are especially important. Yeah. So after the greetings, we will discuss more about the communication part. Okay. Now, if you are playing on the Japanese server, chances are you will tend to, have to communicate with them somewhat. Especially important when it comes to pugging, raids, or trials. So the common misconception about communicating with Japanese is that they don't like playing with foreigners. You know, the usual thing about putting JP only in the party finder descriptions. And foreigners don't really bring good impressions to the Japanese. This is not actually true. And it will require somewhat of a context. Okay, generally, Japanese players have absolutely zero problems with playing with non-Japanese players. This is really not up for debate. However, when it comes to aspects that require communication, it will depend on where the Japanese players are at. So let's say if the Japanese are playing on the NA or EU server, they will usually use Google Translation when trying to communicate with players. I do not know if most of the English players actually played with the Japanese players who use Google Translate before. I assume that now there are 78 people listening to this. So I do not know if you actually stumble across some people like that. But as long as they are actually taking the effort to communicate to you in English, you really should cut them some slack because they are not really English savvy. So the Japanese are actually very good at not standing out. Yeah, when it comes to this. When you're playing on the Japanese server, however, it will require you to play with them. Even if you know the language, just by knowing the language itself doesn't actually prove to be enough. Actually, because in Japan, people usually practice some sort of culture they call Shudan Ishiki, which means group consciousness in English. If you're playing on a Japanese player, if you're playing on a Japanese server, you're expected to follow the flow of the group instead of being individualistic. So, however, this practice in the game is not usually adhered strictly because of the recursive nature of Japanese gamers. So, most of the time, it really depends on how you are reacting to them, and talking to different Japanese will obviously come up with different results. So it's really kind of obvious there. So, the most important part about communicating with the Japanese is that you need to learn how to read the mood as well. For example, if a certain Japanese, let's say A, talks about Kitana trial, then the conversation will most likely revolve around the trial. How you feel about the battle, the stress, or how the tanks feel when tanking the specific part of the mechanic, healers feel when healing the tanks doing a specific mechanic, so on. So that's just about it, seriously. And one thing I realized is that whenever I'm communicating with my Japanese FC mates and my static mates, the conversation rarely touches about things outside the game. It's usually very laser focused on the aspects of the game as well. So most of the time, they won't really talk about their private life. It's really generally limited to the game itself. So throughout the years of playing Final Fantasy XIV, however, I rarely act as a conversation maker and doesn't really join in conversation unless it's necessary. If I want to jump into the conversation, however, I always make a point to first greet before doing so, say something like konnichiwa or konbanwa. Konnichiwa means hello, konbanwa means good evening, and followed by what you want to actually convey, want to reply to their point. So perhaps maybe making greeting, maybe overdoing it, but it usually works. By doing so, I never really act as if I'm intimidating them, and you will most likely avoid any exaggeration by saying something like "excuse me" or something like that. Yeah. So if they say it, assuming that you know Japanese, if they say something and you are interested in the conversation you're partaking, just say konnichiwa or konbanwa first. Let them know that you are there, and then you can do your reply. The bottom note to this, however, is that it really depends on the person that you're talking to as well. The more extroverted and friendly ones, right, will not really require what I said above in order to get the conversation going. But you never know what kind of a person that you meet. So it's still a good thing to take as a reference. Once your relationship with them grows with time, then the process above mentioned can be dropped. Yeah, and then you can just casually converse with them, and nothing really much will happen. It's just the same as communicating with other human beings in the West. So yeah, there's nothing much different. Yeah. The next form of a conversation is more important when it comes to the section of raiding. Yeah, I assume that most of the people will actually be more interested about how raiding actually works in the Final Fantasy XIV community. So I will take a slight water break here, and we'll continue once it's done. All right. Next, we'll talk about raiding. Raiding in Japanese servers can be divided into two parts. First is bugging, and second, progressing through static. Okay, bugging and static is not a foreign concept because it's the same applies everywhere in the world. But the process, experience, and journey itself differs greatly from the Western scenes. Okay. First of all, I would like to talk about bugging. Okay. When it comes to bugging, you need to ensure that you're reading the party finder description. This is a no-brainer because Japanese value honesty, and this is the most important part about being in the Japanese community. You must not lie. So honesty will create a good impression to the Japanese players. And for example, let's say if you want to park, say let's say Susano. Okay, Susano X Extreme. If you are talking about Susano Extreme, you need to ensure that whatever they write about the strat and the drops or whatever is adhered to. So if they say, some people already took this particular weapon, like astrologian weapon and dancer weapon, but the rest is already available, and you're playing astrologian, when you join the party, you can actually list out of the weapons that you want from them, and you don't have to in other case say other things. You just need to greet, and then that's about it. So yeah, to go back to the party finder description, when you join, make sure that you greet them, of course, as usual, and state your desired item. And mount wise, it depends on what the party master states. And if usually the party description will state that the party master will decide who to actually allocate the mount to, and usually party master will be the one to take it. This is already a default rule when they actually make a party about farming farming trial X and everything. So you just have to follow the strat given. If they say, during this mechanic, you do this, you need to say we are taking this particular strat, and usually it's stated in the party finder description. And make sure that this is actually adhered to, because regardless of whether the player actually like the strat or not, you are not to say about what is already been decided by the community. So once you join in, and once we gather the 8 people and enter the trial, there will be, first of all, as usual, greetings, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Then followed by a party master posting their macros. So when the macro is posted, after the macro is completely posted up, you will have to call your position. Let's say if you are DPS and you're playing as a caster, usually you will get D4. So if you are melee, you usually will get D1 or D2, depending on which position that you're comfortable at. And D3 is usually reserved for long range, like bard, machinist, and dancer. So yeah, it's pretty much a very simple thing. So if you already know how the battle goes, you already know the entire mechanics, and you already know the entire strategy, you just need to call out the position, and that's it. You don't really have to say anything further after this. And when it comes to Savage, this is especially important. You also need to read the party finder description, and always be honest to your progression level. Never risk it. You always have to, I have to emphasize this one more time. You always have to be very honest with your progression level. Like if you're at phase A, for example, you are more likely safer to join parties that say we are progging phase A. Instead, if you are at phase A, but you are joining parties that say we are progging at phase C without going through B, this is considered as cheating, phase cheating in the Japanese terms. And doing so will definitely attract the rage of the Japanese players. Yep. The reason why I say that is because, once again, I already emphasized that the Japanese honesty is especially important when it comes to this. If you lie to them, be expected to actually get blacklisted and get caught out by, your player name will be listed at the blacklist list in 5chan, and you will get caught out because of this. Then and if this snowballs, eventually nobody will want to party with you. They will actually kick you out if they know your name. So yeah, this is especially important. So please be careful. If you are playing on a Japanese server, your honesty will be very important. So if you are progging, if you are actually a player that's still progging this particular stage, and you are still at phase A, make sure you only join the phase A party instead of phase C. Do not jump. This is important. So another aspect that is actually quite unique to the Japanese community is the Torinuke system. Torinuke in English is translated or often dubbed as the take leave system. This is how it functions. The Torinuke system is a system where this usually applies to the rewards that you will get after you clear the trial. So for example, I'm going to list out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 steps that comprises of this system. Okay. First, during the end of the run, there will be multiple rewards drop. When the chest contains something that you want to roll, you may press need to roll for the item that you desire. However, you can only need one item out of the rewards shown on the screen. Usually, the take and leave items apply to equipment and upgrade items, and equipment like weapons and armors. 3, the reward will then start its distribution in order. So usually when you look at the reward window, there will be multiple rewards drop. Usually you start from the left, the one that is shown on the left, followed by the second, third, and fourth. The right one is usually the last. So the reward will start because of the order will be decided by the party master beforehand, and you have to press your buttons accordingly. So once you got what you want, you must pass the rest and leave the instance immediately. You must not participate in the distribution any further. There are exceptions, however. So, and lastly, however, the items that are not listed under the take and leave rule, or Torinuke in this instance, you may stay back and gamble your chances to get the rest as well. So yeah, this is basically how the take and leave system works. Do note that all items are usually listed under the rule of take and leave. Be it whether you're actually doing trials or extreme. So you most likely trials or savage actually, sorry. Ultimate doesn't apply. Yeah. So you will most likely be rewarded only 1 out of 4 items available most of the time. If you are nin, for example, let's say if you're playing a ninja and you're participating in the second level of say Sigma Skate Savage, O6S, in other words, with the parts, and you manage to win the battle. The item drops are maybe say ninja hands, healer legs, lost elegant glaze, and the early model tombstone. In this situation, you're only eligible to roll only the ninja hands because you are playing as a class. So you only need one, and the reward that you get is usually distributed to you. Once the reward falls into your hands, however, you're required to immediately pass the rest and leave the instance. Staying back is absolutely not recommended, and you will rouse the distrust if you're not being tactful. So if you are already having the equipment to begin with, you can just forego the rest and say you already have the equipment, and then then the party master will allocate the ninja hands available for everyone to go. The weird thing about this storing nuke system is that but they usually don't set the loot rules to master, party master apparently. It's actually free for all. So this is actually done with the assumption that every Japanese knows the rules, which will be stated in the party finder description beforehand. But perhaps because Japanese are really trustworthy, they usually don't go beyond what is necessary, and they don't greed for the other stuff as well. So if you are actually in the Japanese server and you feel that something is a bit weird over there because they don't set their loot rules to master, don't be afraid or don't get taken aback by it. You just need to actually follow the system, and then it's usually pretty much done. It's pretty much self-explanatory. But let's just try not to be itchy enough and load everything, and try to log everything first before you leave the instance. This is considered to be extremely good. And if you actually get all four rewards without them actually getting one, you will be blacklisted as well. So just be careful. So yeah. Aside from that, pretty much this is about hugging. So on next, I will try to explain a little bit about the history about standby link shells. This is a bit of old practice that was done in the past. So before the inclusion of what do you call that? Crossover party finder. Yeah. Before the existence of crossover party finder, we usually use standby link shells. I don't think this practice was actually done in the Elemental server because of the mixture between Japanese and foreign players. But in Chocobo server, this was actually practiced quite intensely. So how it works is that, first of all, when you actually join a party, but it will require some time to get together all 8 players to proc on a certain rate. So what they will do is they will actually go create a new link shell, a dummy one actually, and you will be included in the dummy link shell. This will last possibly about 2 to 3 hours. So during these 2 to 3 hours, you are usually not added into the party first because you might want to do something else, some other activities that when you are in the party, you won't be able to execute. So you usually will be added into the link shell first. And then once they gather all 8 and everything is added into the link shell, they will usually inform you that, okay, you are ready. So if you are doing any other stuff, please make sure that you are done with whatever you are doing so that we can start progging on the activity. So yeah, this was actually a very old practice last time before the inclusion of crossover party finder. So after the implementation of this feature at patch 3.5, the practice is slowly getting phased out. So you don't really see them anymore today. So yeah. Also, when it comes to progging, it's actually quite possible to prog Ultimate as well. But I don't really recommend progging Ultimate because it's very hard. So you usually prog through Ultimate through static. So just have to let you know that while progging Ultimate is possible, I'm not trying to overplay the effectiveness because you know what Ultimate is supposed to be about. And it's actually possible to prog up to a certain level, and some players who really despise forming a static will usually part all their way to the final phase and clear. It's actually possible to Bahamut, Ultimate Bahamut, and as well as Ultimate Weapon. I'm not sure if Alexander Ultimate is puggable now, but let's just assume that it's not because of how intensely hard the content is. Yeah, so that's just about it. This is just about what I know about pugging in the Japanese server. But do note that pugging in the Japanese server, while it's very smooth, it's not 100% effective. You are not guaranteed 100% clear just because you join those party. And it depends on who you're grouping up with. So if you know what you're doing, then great. It's very easy to clear the stage. But if you are grouping with players who do not know what they are doing, which applies to pretty much every other regions as well, then yeah, you will definitely get stuck for a while. Because even for easier rate tier like creator, it still took me up to 3 weeks in order to finish the tier as well. So really, it really depends on the group that you're joining. So yeah. Next, I'm going to explain about why pugging Savage and Trials in Japanese player is considered to be smoother compared to the horror stories that I heard from the Western scene. Okay, there are at least 4 factors. First is discipline. Japanese usually have a degree of knowledge on how the game is played, taught to them by their friends and their FC mates. The Japanese also practice another concept that we don't usually ever pay attention in mind. It's called the Meiwaku system. It's not really a system, it's just a concept, the Meiwaku concept. Whenever you are playing with other players, you are absolutely sure that you're not bringing troubles to them. But instead of forcing their practice onto yourself, they don't force themselves onto others. So even if they say I must, whenever I play with the Japanese, I must remember that I don't want to end up causing troubles to them. It's usually applied to self. Whatever, whether they want to apply that kind of concept to themselves or not, is totally up to them. So this is a bit different from the Western counterpart as well. Yeah, so discipline is definitely the number one thing that they will pay adhere to their mind whenever they do this. Everyone will have at least a degree of knowledge on how the game is played. So they will apply the knowledge and mold it with the concept of Meiwaku, and then they will play it based on their knowledge. So they usually also do read the community session guides as well. This is a bit different because unlike over here, we have the balance and the other stuff which is more concentrated and centralized guides that is available for everyone. Japanese wise is a bit scattered, actually. Every players tend to actually make their some sort of a guide that is posted on Lodestone, sorry. So you actually will these people will actually refer to the guide through Lodestone instead of depending on the third party sites like the balance and all that. There are also mixed stories about a lot of Japanese players do have the partners to journey with them, and those are more knowledgeable with teaching how to play effectively. So, like for instance, I've seen a lot of streamers that usually play with their friends, or some of them are even couples and married couples. So the husband will usually teach the wife how to play and all that. So the impression here is that Japanese are more attentive to what's been taught, and they don't really reject what is being told by the others as well. So if you say, let's say if you do this and that, it will be more effective. It will be much more, much better than the usual method that you're doing. They will usually, so nanda, which means, oh yeah, is that right? So they would actually just take whatever they were taught to them. And then if you think that the things that they are doing is wrong, you can just politely point out that, hey, maybe because of what you're doing this is a bit ineffective. Why not try that one? So as long as you're polite about your approach, they definitely will be more receptive to your statement, and they will definitely do what you're asking them to do. So even with the above pros, there are also the downside of them as well, because progging is usually done with 8 strangers. Basically, it's like playing with 8 different AIs, and when you disband, you're grouping up with another 8 different players. So the progression is usually very much reset, and they will have different behaviors when it comes to raiding. So, which is why community-wide parts threads are usually created or around during the Alexander raid tier. This is done because they want to actually enhance the consistency of bugging as well. But even with the community part threads, it does not really guarantee 100% clear rate because due to different people having different preferences when using cooldowns, buffs, and so on. Rotation can vary as well because it's not optimized. Do note that their rotation is very different from our rotation as well. They usually optimize based on the environment that they are in. Ping is definitely a factor, but is usually comprised and constructed very differently from the Western part. But I think recently they start to most likely ditch away the way they do the rotations and depend mostly on the balance, the guide that is created by the balance, due to some of the world first prop team actually get their world first, and the Japanese will naturally get curious about how they actually perform it. What is their rotation? What is the how do they align their buffs and all that? So so naturally when it comes to that, the Japanese will find out that their methods no longer work effectively. So they start to have their mindset merge with the Western counterpart of them as well. So I assume that coming Endwalker, the raiding will most likely be consistent. As in, the Japanese will no longer create their own guidelines, and the Japanese will follow the Western sanction rotation. This is already happening, coming this Eden tier, as well as the Epic of Alexander as well, where my last static group actually follows the rotation guide given by the balance as well. So yeah, so it's starting to get more and more generalized and more uniform. So going back to the cons of the particular progging, yeah, it does not guarantee the 100% clear rate due to different people having different preferences in cooldowns, buffs, and so on. Rotations can vary as well because it's not optimized. Because of this, the factor can eventually snowball to inconsistencies, which is why even though pugging is generally considered to be smoother, it doesn't really mean 100% clear rate. So this is something that you need to take note. So yeah. So when it comes to pug strats, usually it depends on the discussion form around in forums, in summary sites, and 5chan. So describing a little bit of a history of this particular pug strat, they usually start from Pekolok first. Pekolok used to be the most famous and the most widely adapted for strat, but considering Pekolok already quit the game, Okome is the one that takes the path. And then starting Stormblood, Haru Urara became one of the most followed guys because this player is also an ultimate player. He cleared the tier, but his guide is usually very helpful because he actually make video guides. So people can actually refer to that and adapt the strat from there. And then starting Shadowbringers, more and more content creators start to come out with their own part strats as well. So starting from Meister Akito, and then Ayatori is another one as well. Yeah. So usually how they decide is that if you look at the party finder, they usually will state what particular strat that they're adapting at. If you see about 99% of the party starting to take, say, Haru Urara strat, then you know that this particular part is using the strat. So yeah. Another one last thing I want to talk about optimization is that optimization is never factored to progging. So Japanese people prefer stability, and your optimal DPS is usually not counted into that thing. If you are playing pugging with the Japanese, please do not greed your DPS. You always put mechanic first, DPS second. This is the most important thing you need to think about it. Okay. Now, considering everything about pugging is done, I will move on to the static groups. Okay. Static group is usually done with two methods, either through lodestone or third-party sites like FF14 Party Finder. It's actually a site. You can actually Google it if you want to. Okay. Static group is usually done this way. If you want to join a static, you usually will have to look through a group that is recruiting in lodestone. So if you find a lodestone entry that says they are recruiting a particular class or job, and you are and the job is the job that you want to play for this tier, you usually leave a message on the lodestone first, and the leader will usually get back to you. Once the leader replies to your message in lodestone, they will leave you a Discord ID message, which you can use them to contact them. After you contact them on the Discord, the leader will immediately delete the message in their entry, so that their Discord entry will remain less spam and less approachable as much as possible. Second, before you contact them, always read the requirements first. What they are looking for, what's the raid time? Usually you have to follow the Japanese standard time, and what's the required equipments, and any extra conditions. Extra conditions may include something like whether you have a very good ping, do you frequently disconnect, and so on. If you frequently disconnect, they will discourage you from actually joining them because they don't like to be interrupted when raiding. This is important. Yeah, this is something that I need to take it out as well, because Japanese are very, very ping sensitive. If you are playing in an environment where it keeps on getting cut and all that, they will usually feel very frustrated because they don't feel as if they are progressing through the raid. And even though if the players are slightly a bit innocent on that part, because the ping is something that players cannot control, is usually one of the downsides of raiding as a static. This is something that I don't know whether it can be addressed in the future, but I think that there is a debate topic about that. So if you are interested, you can actually approach me privately, and I will try to look for that topic, see if you are interested in reading it. Yeah. Always emphasize on honesty. This is important. So if you do not fulfill most of the requirements, please find another group that fulfills your condition. But if there's only one or two items where you felt that this can be negotiated, right? I mean, it's a bit different from what I expected, but I would like to see if the raid leader can conform to what I suggested over here. If you think that way, you can try and negotiate with them. Yeah, it's okay, because even though if they don't recruit you in the end, at the very least you attempted to communicate with them, so they don't have any animosity of you asking any questions. The rest is generally the same as bugging. So statics will usually use the safest strat devised by the figures mentioned in the bugging. So if the static says we are using the Meister Akito, and all of the 7 other players are fine with following the Meister Akito strat, you will follow the Meister Akito strat, because even if you, so it depends on what kind of the guides they are reading. If they read this guide, you follow the guide. Yeah, this is usually how it works. And optimization is obviously not counted. The will to optimize, however, will always depend on the party. You may voice out, of course, but please do not guarantee that this will happen. Yeah. And lastly, statics are never long lasting. This is a bit different from the Western scenes, I suppose, because while the group will like to stick to one group as long as possible, static in Japanese is never long lasting. After they clear the static, and after you have farmed enough of the weapons or all of the things that you require for you to build your best in slot for the main job that you brought during the tier, the static will usually disband. Yeah. So usually it lasted around 8 to 16 weeks. I say 8 weeks is because 8 weeks is enough for you to farm 8 tombstones to get a weapon for your best in slot job. And 16 is to gear up your alternate job. So it may, so around that it may last about 8 weeks to 16 weeks. Statics that last through one tier is actually very rare. Yeah, you don't really see that kind of static much. So if you are playing on, you're usually focused on raiding on the Japanese tier, be prepared to actually see, prepared to actually keep looking for parties. You really have to do that. Okay. So raiding can be very long. So I apologize if this took up so long. So let's talk something different about reading. So variety of activities that the Japanese people will do. So there are two kinds of activities people will do: role playing and community activities, and non-role playing part. In other words, role playing is usually not conducted at all. It's a bit different from the Western ones. Usually, the role playing that I see in the Japanese server is usually something like they act as a waitress, waiter, and so on. They do not play as a character, but they play as a personality that is different from the default ones. So let's say if this person is a bit reclusive, but is more comfortable trying to socialize online, they will adapt a completely different personality instead. This is pretty much common when it comes to the Western one. I do not speak, I do not really speak for the Western ones because I never really done role playing before. But in Japanese, this is actually what I observe from them. So very team based as well. Yeah, they also role playing as maid or waiter or waitresses is very common when it comes to this. So yeah, that's pretty much about role playing. Actually, it's pretty much very short and all that. So I'm pretty sure that some people will be interested in whether Japanese does erotic role playing. The answer is no, unfortunately. But if you want to know more about it, you best be actually approach me private and we can be discuss about it further. This is not a topic that I think that's suitable for this stage event, so I will try to omit that part. Second, community activities. Okay, community activities is usually a community gathering. It's actually not very variety, if you ask me. And most of the time, community activities will comprise something like, number one, making fan arts. This is very common. And number two is sharing music. This is another one. And three, decoration of FC house and allowing visitors to join them is actually the most common community activities that's done in Japanese server. Examples include, number one, hosting a pub bar. We are our FC is opening a pub. Please join us in this FC. We have drinks, we have cocktails, and we have alcohol. So if you are interested in just joining around and social around and hang out, please join us. So yeah, this is the most common role playing plus community activity that you can see on the Japanese server, and it's especially prominent on the Carbuncle server, if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot of this. So if you're interested, you can actually try and find out. For your information, Carbuncle is situated in the Elemental data center. So yeah. So if you're more on the social aspects of the game itself, it is advised that you go around there and try to look around. Right. So considering that this project is tied a bit to the travel project, and is helped to support the travel project in honor of the Pride Month, I ought to try to share how welcoming the community is when it comes to stances on sexual minority. The answer, however, can be rather vague, rather vague if you ask me. This isn't to say that the Japanese are homophobic or transphobic or whatever. It's actually the opposite. Yeah. It's, however, rather complicated here, and a non-Japanese like me should not really speak so much on their behalf. But what I'm saying here is pretty much encompassed on what I take on the matter, so I will try to be as neutral as possible. Okay. For starters, Japanese as a country does not forbid same-sex relationship, and as of today, is actually quite progressive by Asian standards. The only thing that is not recognized by the Japan law, however, will be the same-sex marriage and the civil union. So far, the only countries in the Asia to recognize civil union will be Taiwan and Israel. I think Hong Kong does this as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I have heard cases of transgender having difficulty trying to get their identity changed to be acknowledged by the country. But this is actually rather typical of Japan's bureaucracy, and it's not really a surprise there. So to dispel many people's concerns here, Japan culture and the Shinto religion does not have a history of hostility against homosexuality, or at least not what I know of. And a 2019 poll, this is a research that I did before I conduct this stage event, indicating that 68% actually agreed to homosexuality and should be accepted by society, while the 22% disagree. One general thing you should take in mind is that Japanese are not really against LGBTQ and so on, but are generally more apathetic towards them. They take the stance of people have the choice to be what they want, and it's generally more accepting to that. And they don't also butt in unless they are provoked. Once again, this is very true to their passive-aggressive nature. So to sum up, as a person of sexual minority, as long as you're not openly flaunting hard about your own sexual status to the point of detrimental, you'll be very likely safe. If this doesn't reassure you well, so let's just put it another way here. Japanese will usually look at your character and personality. So your sexual preferences is completely irrelevant to them. Also, for your reference, Naoki Yoshida, the director and producer for the game, is also a person who is very supportive of sexual minority as well. I will quote one of the statement that I took from Kotaku. Okay, and quoting one of the answers he gave Kotaku when asked about gender restrictions on clothing, this is what he said. I think there should be freedom in your values when it comes to the different genders. We do not want to restrict attire and clothing that you wear based on the character's gender or sex. And also another one, in terms of values and our players, it's a time when a lot of changes in perspectives. But we can't ignore the people who refuse to make changes in their values. There may be players who do not want to see male players wear attire that's traditionally worn of females. We do want to respect freedom of self-expression and that people want to dress the same way. But we do need to consider to be mindful of those who look at people dressed in a certain way and manage how they perceive things. So yeah, the keyword to be taken over here is freedom of self-expression. This is the keyword that Japanese really appreciate. So as long as you're not openly flaunting at them or rubbing on their face so hard that to the point of detrimental, your freedom of self-expression is yours, and they will not butt in at all. This is very important. Yeah. So yeah, there's no need to feel uneasy about how Japanese will perceive you. You're completely free to be what you want. When it comes to the community, however, I will have to say that sadly, it's not common to see LGBTQ communities on Japanese servers. Throughout my 6 years of playing this game, I have not seen any Japanese community recruitments, especially for LGBTQ, like Gyoza or Rainbow Material. And if there's any, it's usually around close circles and it's not widely known, not advertised, and it's not open for recruitment either. That's not to say that there aren't players that aren't of the sexual minority. There are a lot of LGBTQ topics that you can look around and look soon as well, as long as you know what are the keywords to find across. If you know Japanese, you could try writing an entry in Lodestone to see if there are Japanese-centric LGBTQ communities that you can join. Yeah, so don't despair. If you are thinking that joining this kind of community will provide you a safe space, there is. It's just that you need to look for it. It's a bit harder than on the Western sphere. There's something that I have to admit. So most of this stuff aren't really known in the open unless you delve deeper. Yeah, as I mentioned just now. This is due to the players mainly not feeling comfortable sharing their personal stuff. They are not really open. So they also take their privacy very seriously and prefer to just put up a front, which is called tatemae in Japanese, to play the game. So most of the time, you usually just come across individuals that seem very normal, very normal, unless they state otherwise. You usually won't see any Japanese saying that they are gay unless they feel really open about you. Yeah. So when it comes to interacting with these individuals, please, depends on how you interact with them, they will respond back in kind. So be nice, and they will be nice. Yeah. To conclude this segment, I would like to say that there's certainly no issues of being a gay, lesbian, bi, trans, or queer in Japan. And certainly they won't see you any different just because you identify as one. First of all, your personality will always come first. And this is something worth taking note on. However, do note that Japanese players are largely reclusive, as mentioned above, a few times now. And depending on who you speak with, they can say things and they can react to things that can cause misunderstandings. Like, it's not that they are homophobic or xenophobic or anything. It's just that they do not know. They are pretty much acting ignorant. So please try to be nice. Okay? Please try to be nice and explain to him kindly. But sometimes, right, they trying to be nice also doesn't necessarily mean they are acting good. So if you see them, just gently correct on the matter. If you correct them nicely, they will be more receptive to your correction as well. And most of them will know what to do and what not to do when interacting with people like you. Yep. So we are reaching 12. We are reaching an hour of the stage event now. So one last thing before I end the segment today. So lastly, I will touch on the community resources. This is an interesting one. Okay, first of all, the most prominent place where the Japanese can discuss the game is, well, not really, because there's no actual prominent place, so to speak. Most people in the Western sphere like us will use the subreddit or Discord. But in Japanese, it's very scattered. Yeah. Some created their own communities. Like, even when it comes to Discord servers, there is no general biggest community like us, the subreddit over here, or the balance, or somewhere else. They usually will create their own data center server. And data center centric Discord for Japanese is like there are multiple versions of it. So there's no some sort of a unified community. So some created their own community. A lot of communities where they become admins and everything. There's no unified server in Japan. Yeah. Another example would be some created a community themselves as a streamer. They gathered a lot of fans that plays the same game as well. Well, this is actually quite similar to the Western sphere as well. So some will also use Lodestone to write their own FF15 blog. This is another one where people will discuss the game through reading Japanese people writing their blog entry on Lodestone, and they will look over there. But perhaps the closest one that we know so far that is the most well-known one where people gather around to discuss the game with 5chan. Okay, 5chan is actually an anonymous text bot that functions somewhat like Reddit. Actually, it's more like 4chan, but their structure functions more like Reddit, where players will gather there to discuss about the current state of the game. Okay, another part will be some people will also use summary sites. In Japan, they call it matome site, which largely take its content from 5chan to form a specific discussion track and attracted 2chan's reaction to the specific discussion to see how players reacted to it, while also opening comments to gather further reactions as well. There are also others who write their own blog site that, as in, they're hosted either by through FC2 blogs or live blog. And one of the most popular blog site will be Ichigeki Kasatsu SS Nikki, which is authored by Mighty, the person who wrote his experience about the game, and is the most well-known for creating the story of the Father of Light. Yeah, which is then the blog site became popular and adapted into a TV drama movie. Unfortunately, Mighty passed away last year. Passed away not long ago. Last year, I think during December. His death actually shocked many of the Japanese community. Yeah, Mighty is generally considered to be the most well-regarded community figure amongst Japanese players as well. And his passing is widely considered to be a huge loss to the community, as well as the developers, because he's actually a close friend of Yoshida as well. Yeah. So other than all of the resources mentioned above, there are also people who generally consume FF14 content through Twitch and YouTube. Recently, VTubers are getting very popular. So there are also VTubers who actually stream FF14, which they can discuss the game over there as well. There are also world first group, like one of the most famous Japanese groups so far that I think most of you may have heard of will be the 5150, which already disbanded and they have since gone their separate ways. Another one will be Twitter. Yeah, Twitter is also one of the most common part where they tweet about the game, as well as, they created some sort of a guide, then they're posting on Twitter and then people can access it as well. Yeah. When it comes to official community resources, however, there's a lodestone, obviously, and amount of the content that is posted there. And when it comes to streaming part, there's Eosia Gakuen. Eosia Gakuen, if I'm not mistaken, has already been discontinued and they are no longer doing it again, no longer doing it anymore. So the new one that replaces Eosia Gakuen will be a slot called How Do You Like Heidelin? Or in Japanese, it's called Heidelin Tankentai, if I'm not mistaken. A streaming program that was somewhat like a duty comments on the EU and NA side. So yeah, that's about it. It's actually quite scattered. So all of the things that I stated in these community resources are mainly just examples. So if you actually see other community resources in Japanese, feel free to actually share in the Japanese channels in Final Fantasy XIV. I actually took a very great interest on that. So if you ping me, I will actually look into it. So yeah, that's about it. That's about the all of the things that I would like to share about the Japanese community. So as already stated in the disclaimer, what I've been stating here is not actually the everything that I know about the community. 6 years of playing this game is actually not enough because I think I'm focusing way too much on the rating side and less on the social aspect of the game. So I don't claim to be an expert on the matter, but hopefully with what I'm saying over here, you'll find this useful. And please forgive me if I was like, rambling something like an old man or something nonsense. I was a bit nervous here, but I still hope that this will provide you great insight on how the community works in the Japanese side. So once when the data center worldwide data center travel feature is implemented, you can feel free to come to Chocobo, look for the player Saya Amimiya, and then say hi. I will respond to you. So yeah, thanks for attending to the stage event talk today. Thank you.
Okay. So before we head into the Q&A, I want to reread the disclaimer for people who may have not been here at the start. So this event is a public stage channel and is being recorded. By attending this event, by participating in the Q&A, and or by speaking or performing, you are consenting to audio recording of your voice and or performance, as well as video recording of your username and profile picture, even if you do not speak and or perform during this event. You also consent to the copying, creation of derivative works, use, distribution, and publication of the recordings, and any postings on social media, public announcements, publications, websites, applications, and other commercial, marketing, or promotional materials produced by or for Discord Inc. without your review or approval worldwide in perpetuity. Please refrain from use of profanity and obscene language or remarks during this event. As a reminder, Discord community guidelines apply, in addition to our server rules. In violation of these guidelines, including any form of hate speech or bullying, is prohibited and may result in removal from the event server or platform. We are going to choose to not allow hand raising here and take questions in chat if anybody wishes to ask any questions. I do think I saw one question earlier, so we can get that one started. If you typed out the English characters for a greeting, how would that be received? For example, if you typed out konnichiwa instead of using auto translate or Japanese characters, how would people respond?
Okay. Depending on which data center you are actually, because I think this won't pose any problems on Elemental data center, because Elemental data center is actually notorious for having a lot of gaijins, so the so-called foreigners over there. So if you say konnichiwa, they can read it. Not of an issue. Not an issue. They would actually respond it kind of saying, hey, konnichiwa, then they say, yeah, hello, nice to meet you, everything. You can just proceed nicely. In Gaia or Mana, I'm not sure because I don't actually stumble across players who will write Japanese using English characters. But I assume it's not an issue because there are players out there who doesn't convert their keyboard, the type speech into Japanese. So even if you type konnichiwa, they can read it. They can still read it and they don't care. Yeah. The most important part is that you actually greet them. It's the most important thing. As long as you greet them, it doesn't really matter how you write it. Even though if it's in auto translate characters, if it's running dungeon, it's just whatever. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so a question from Risky.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the JP side of things, people are discouraged from jumping forward in a fight from phase A to C. What about the other way around? Is it normally okay to say you're in phase C but want more practice in A, so go back to a phase A party?
Yeah, definitely not an issue because Japanese actually welcome this kind of players because number one, you're learning, of course, and number two, you're actually helping out the party. So if you actually say you're at phase C, but you want to go back to phase A and practice more, you can actually provide an insight to the remaining 7 parties who are actually stuck at phase A and tell them on what to do. And they will definitely welcome you on it. They will definitely say things like, oh, Naruhodo, that's definitely very helpful. Thank you for giving us an advice. And they will actually follow what you're trying to suggest them. So yeah, this is actually very much encouraged. So please, if you are playing on the Japanese server and you are focusing on phase C, but you want to probe on phase A to get more of the insight of how the mechanic works, please do so. They definitely welcome you for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Here's another one from Miriam. How is the novice network in JP servers compared to NA servers?
This is an interesting thing because I don't join the novice network, and I actually don't see novice network being a thing on the Japanese server. Is either it's a very close circle, they treat it as some sort of a specific close circle things like the most of the other community, or it's not utilized and it became some sort of a thingy. So yeah, usually right, they don't learn the basics through novice network. Yeah, what they learn is through the help text, the green question mark thingy that you see in the game. Yeah, that one actually. They actually read all the games in the help files that you can access in the game. And unlike this is one interesting thing that I find it. Yeah, I find it quite interesting when compared to the Western people. The most of the English players don't tend to read the green question mark that's presented to them, but the Japanese frequently and frequently read those type of stuff because it's written personally by Yoshida. And most of the players who play Final Fantasy XIV are really a huge fan of Yoshida and what he does. So people will naturally refer to that instead.
That I've actually heard from him directly. He recounted a story of how he was traveling home late one night, and was at one of the train stations, and he was coming up the escalator as
Yep.
a girl was coming down, and she recognized him and actually went to the bottom and then tried running back up the down escalator because she was so excited to oh my god, it's Yoshida. So he is as much of a rock star status over in Japan as he is in North America.
Yep, correct. So basically, whatever is being personally authored by Yoshida, Japanese people will read it. They don't care. So especially because in one of the field, I think in some time around Stormblood, if I'm not mistaken, there is this particular live letter where he says that, please, the green question mark that is when you actually started the game, you see this green question mark. Please read them. I personally wrote it, and then really the Japanese players read them. They learn the game from there. They learn the game basics actually from that part as well. So I find it quite weird that why wouldn't they keep on complaining about Square Enix doesn't teach us about the game. They don't teach us about the game at all. They don't teach us the basics. I'm like, why don't you guys read the green question mark thingy? It's there. The resources are there. Why are you guys not referring to that? So yeah, it's a bit a bit strange here. So to answer Miriam's question, yes, the novice network is quite underutilized, if you ask me. I'm not really sure about that too. I'm not 100% sure of that as well. But my impression on that is that it's very underutilized. And people usually refer to basics, right? Not because they are mentors teaching sprouts. It's more like friends teaching friends. FC teaching FC mates. Link Shell teaching Link Shell. Discord people teaching Discord. Something like that. And then the rest, they read the community resources in Lodestone or those that are personally authored by, you see like the Just J guy posted the link just now, the Futari no Yoshida-san. This is another community resources that people refer to as well. So Japanese are not lacking of basic resources that they have as well. If they want to learn the basics of the game, they can just go there as well. They don't need to refer to the noise network and everything. So yeah.
All right. And our next question comes from Frace. You said Japanese are quite reserved about their private life. Does that mean online relationships, for example, formed in Final Fantasy XIV, are less common compared to how common it is in NA servers?
Funny that this question came up because online relationships are less common. Actually, it's quite rampant. It's the opposite actually. But usually, number one, relationship between, let's say, Japanese A and Japanese B are number one, first and foremost, private. And number two, is usually shared at what do you call that? It's actually shared at Matome side. Oh, recently, I find B to be quite annoying, despite me, A like me, referring A as himself, I actually have a little bit of a relationship problem with B these days, and blah 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 blah. These kind of stories are very common there's actually a specific summary site that is dedicated specifically to talk about relationships. Actually, so it's a bit of a paradox. Yeah, I have to admit it's a bit of a paradox. They are quite reserved about their private life. But when it comes to online relationship and needing the advice of people, they actually are quite active in posting this on 5chan, and they will discuss it with the people around to get advice from them. And then from there, the Matomi site take the discussion and then post it on the post on their own site to gather more responses from people who are reading the entry. So to answer that question is opposite, but it also has a little bit of a paradox elements in it. Yeah, so it's not really easy to answer that one.
Question from Seru.
Yeah.
Does the JP community treat acting in-person events like FanFest differently than NA counterpart?
Okay. Can I ask back a little bit? I want him to elaborate further on what is this acting in person mean, as in say you or a voice actor or guest member or what?
Yeah. He's typing now.
Yeah. Like the public, okay.
So I
Oh,
assume you mean something like how we meet up with our friends that you know online at FanFest events type thing. So how when the Japanese people finally meet up in person at the events, how do they treat that?
not much different if you ask me, because let's say if the person is naturally shy, let's say if you meet a Japanese person online in the Japanese server, let's say she, for example, a girl, a female player, she's naturally shy, she's a bit reclusive, doesn't talk much, everything. Don't expect that to change when you meet them in real life as well. They will also be very reclusive and like very scaredy cat, sit on the corner and all that. But it depends on person to person. This is not really an easy question to answer, because there are three types of people that I've observed so far. First is the example that I mentioned just now. And second will be the person who likes to have dual identity. Very quiet in real life, but very then talkative online. And number three, the complete opposite as well. Very reserved online, but very talkative in real life. So it really depends on the person you meet. It's not much different from the players in the Western sphere. A lot more common than you thought, than you think actually. Yeah. Not that different. Yeah. It's really not that different. Really not that different.
All right. So if we have any other further questions, we can get them asked. Otherwise, it seems like we're just about ready to wrap up here.
Yeah. Don't worry, you can keep on asking questions, and if it's out of time, you can always leave me a DM and I will answer your questions. I wonder if people can find Mr. Happy Actually, yeah. This is funny because according to the last JP Fan Fest, there are I see at least 5 groups of people approaching Mr. Happy and say, "Hi, Mr. Happy, I'm your fan. Can I actually have a picture with you?" This is true story, actually. They can find Mr. Happy at JP Fan Fest. They can. Yeah. Do not underestimate Mr. Happy's reputation in Japan. He is actually quite popular there.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending our event. I hope you enjoyed it. Our next event will be coming up in a couple weeks. Oh, hold on. We have another question here from Kinara Lejanta. In the NA and EU servers, the Japanese community is highly regarded for the cohesion and coordinating among their rating communities. When the community encounters new content, how long on average does it take for the Japanese community to achieve that cohesion in rating and new content? How is progression handled?
Okay. Usually, first, I will try to dissect the question a bit. How long on average does it take the JP community to achieve the cohesion? Minimum 3 days. This is pretty common now. Minimum 3 days. But of course, early stage, early stage to achieve the cohesion is 3 days, but doesn't mean that it's stable. There will definitely be a lot of people discussing that, hey, the strat that we see in this particular guys and everything, right, is a bit problematic, and I don't, my group can't really seem to pull off the same cohesion that your group did. So is there any other way? So the person who saw, who formed that particular strat and all that, will keep on devising until it's dumbed down to any single stupid Japanese can perform it level. Yeah, it usually will take around 2 to 3 weeks to fully formalize to that level, but the fastest they took is 3 days. And progression handle is pretty simple. It's not any different from your Wolfers group. Not at all. It's just they usually, once they invite, they will spend about 5 to 10 minutes discussing why we screw up, why we do this and why we do that and everything. It happens to my previous T group as well, the Epic of Alexander group, where each wipe we will spend 5 minutes to 10 minutes discussing why we screw up. I think it's not that different from the Western part. So through multiple discussions in the game after each wipe and in Discord as well, we just reach the cohesion naturally. This eventually we reach that because we already communicate enough and we already proc enough to be able to sync together. So from there, eventually we reach that. Unless you are very stubborn on your own ways, eventually this is not much of an issue. So yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we just mimic around each other, like one member says. Yep, that's about it.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming today. Our next stage event will be June 18th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. It'll be from the representatives of the Rainbow Materia team, giving a talk on A New Eorzea for Everyone, what Final Fantasy XIV gets right for queer gamers. This will also be in benefit of our fundraiser, which you can find in the pins in the main stage channel. All proceeds will be going to the Trevor Project. We've currently raised $645. If you send me proof of your donation into my DMs, I'll make sure you get the donator role in the Discord as well. So thank you for coming, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. Thanks for having me. Bye.